resentful in the OTO if you don't accept them as being totally perfect just the way they are. If you say, you have to change, you have to do different things, you have to grow and develop in certain ways, you have to learn things that you don't know now, they're very resentful about that. And their attitude is like, no, I'm fine just the way I am. That's what being a Thelemite is about. It's being a god already, and I shouldn't have to change or grow or do anything. And when you suggest that, like, no, maybe you're not fine just the way you are, maybe you need to change, they get very unhappy.
Well, but don't you see the connection between this ideology of equality and this escape from reality?
Sure. Who else would want equality but people who needed to escape from reality into some fantasy land where everybody's equal and they don't have to worry about being unequal anymore?
Right.
It appeals the most to people who deep down feel resentful and are fuck-ups, for lack of a better term.
Well, right, because in the real world, this hierarchy exists, and they find themselves on the bottom.
Right.
They don't want to do the work to get their way to the top. They don't want to struggle. So instead, they go to La La Land. They go to the 30th ether, and they see all of these astral movies, and then they want to hear stories of other people's astral movies,
right,
instead of actually going up and talking with the entities to see what they could do to improve their lives.
Right. Well, one of the things you can also point out as well is that the people who demand this equality the most tend to be the ones that are obviously not only at the lower part of the hierarchy, but also the people who don't really follow the equality line when it counts. I mean, if you say the people who say, well, everyone's equal and how dare you suggest that there's a hierarchy, you go, okay, well, so somebody is a Nazi, they're unequal to you. No, not them. Somebody who believes the exact opposite, or someone who's a racist or a sexist or homophobic. Oh, no, those people aren't our equals. Well, if they're not, if their opinions aren't equal to yours, then obviously you don't really believe in equality. Oh, yes, we do. I mean, this sort of stupidity goes on all the time. It's unacknowledged in the occult community, and people would rather have you and I talk about what? Like, how to do geomancy? Go buy a book by Israel Regardie. Go look at the Golden Dawn stuff on geomancy. I mean, go and do the experiments. Write it down. Work on geomancy. What do they want from us in a podcast to talk about when it comes to that?
Do they want us to actually go through, okay, first you do step 1, you do this. Step 2, you do that.
You can read this out of a book. I mean, you
exactly.
make this point all the time. Why do people need us to talk about things on the podcast if they can go and get a book that we'll discuss? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. The podcast is not an efficient means to go through and give step-by-step aspects.
Yeah.
A book can do that in greater detail and much more efficient. What the podcast can do is it can bring together ideas and allow people to express them in this immediate format.
Right.
But this is not instructions on tape.
Well, again, I'm curious though. I mean, if we were to get a whole bunch of these Golden Dawn people together from whatever Golden Dawn group they're working on and advance them up through all the Golden Dawn degrees from whatever system they're on to the point where they're adepts or exempt adepts, what are those people going to be working on? What are they going to be thinking about? What problems are they going to face? Are they going to face problems dealing with values and ontologies and how to create things and how to bring things into manifestation and what sort of values the things that they're creating should have, or what they're fighting for on a certain highly developed plane? If they're what are they going to be concerned about at that level?
Everybody that I've ever seen who claims any kind of degree or grade within any kind of Golden Dawn, honestly, I haven't been that impressed with.
Right. Well, what's important to them? What are their highest values? What are they trying to bring into manifestation? If you're a master of the temple, what temple are you the master of? And what goes on inside that temple? And what's the purpose of that temple? What is it supposed to do? People are involved in this minutia activity in the Golden Dawn of memorizing, the tables or making their little weapons. To what end? What ultimately is all that leading towards? And I want to have that discussion. I don't want to have a discussion about how to consecrate a dagger. People can go read Israel Regardie. They can come up with that themselves. I want to have the question, I want to ask the question, I want to look at the debate of where is it all going? What's the aim? What's the essence of this activity? What's it about, and why is it meaningful, and why should I give a damn? I don't want to watch fat people parading around in robes, holding up little cardboard, sticks or whatever, thinking that they're like the grandpa zoo of the universe. That does not interest me. I want to know what the real purpose is behind it. And we've all been doing this long enough. We have our magical weapons. We've done our geomancy. We know how to consult oracles. We can throw the Yi King. We can do all this stuff. So ultimately, having gone through all of that, what is it really all about? If you're not interested in that, you are either trying to distract yourself from problems that you probably need to look at in the real world, or you're an idiot.
All right. Well, in that nice ending there, I think we'll end this discussion today and encourage people to give us feedback, which we will try and reply to. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, John.
93.
I hope everybody enjoyed that discussion. It's a very important subject that people start seeing the broader aspect of what magic is about, and not just thinking that it has to do with the elemental weapons and dressing in robes and things like that. Magic includes all kinds of things, including philosophy, including ontology, including politics, and so much more. And people will be better served if they start seeing the wider aspects of magic. Now, moving forward, as I said earlier, Christopher Knowles wrote the essay Symphony for the Devil, interviewed Jimmy Page, Kenneth Anger, and Bobby Beausoleil all about the creation of the movie Lucifer Rising. So here's the interview with Christopher Knowles.
We have on the phone with us Christopher Knowles. Welcome to the podcast, Christopher, 93.
Thanks, John.
Now, you have an essay coming out in the November edition of Guitar World. I guess it's on the stands right now.
That's true.
It's called Symphony for the Devil, and it's a interview of Jimmy Page, Kenneth Anger, Bobby Beausoleil, all talking about the creation of the movie Lucifer Rising and the soundtrack. First,
soundtracks.
I'm sorry, soundtracks, right.
Yeah,
both
three.
Page's and Beausoleil's soundtracks, right.
Mm-hmm. And Mick Jagger's as well.
Okay, right. To start off, what prompted you to create this essay or to research into this?
Well, I had been doing some work for classic rock, writing some feature articles, and I basically needed a new story because I didn't have anything to do for them, and had sort of run across this story over the years in various personal researches, and had read a really good book by a guy named Gary Lackman called Turn Off Your Mind that went pretty deeply into the story. And I thought there was a lot more there that people hadn't really gotten into because nobody had really spoken to the principles involved. Everybody had sort of talked to, or actually gone from the public record, and nobody had really asked the actual creators of the work what they were doing and why they were doing it. So I pitched it to my editor, and it took a while for it to get off the ground, and it took a while to get in touch with everybody. It took a year from the time I first come up with the story to the first publication of it in the summer of 2006 in Classic Rock magazine, which is out of the UK.
Right, and so the edition that's coming out now in Guitar World is a reprint from the one. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, and so it took a year.
Yeah, it took a year because we were waiting for Jimmy Page to talk. I mean, he's been working on a new solo album, and he would only speak to people in the UK that he had known personally. So I was waiting for an interview to incorporate into my piece. I had already spoken to Kenneth. I spoke to Kenneth Anger last June, and I'd spoken to Bobby Beausoleil several times over the past 6 or 7 months. He's in prison in Oregon, so my contacts with him were pretty sporadic, but definitely worthwhile. There was a point when the piece was really sort of running aground, and Bobby's influence really, or his impetus, his input, really revived the piece for me personally, because I was getting pretty close to just dropping it. It's like trying to get in touch with royalty, getting in touch with Page, and even Anger, took a lot of doing. He's had some personal issues that,
right,
made it impossible for a while to get in touch with him. And first of all, I had to find out where he was and who was dealing with him, and who was his representation and everything like that. So it was a bit of an investigational work on my part as well.
So when you contacted Kenneth Anger and asked him, to give his side of the story, was he enthusiastic about it, or was he?
No, he really didn't want to talk about it at all. It took a long time. He really didn't, want to go over it. He didn't want to talk about, because he and Jimmy had a pretty nasty falling out over the film and over the soundtrack, and he didn't want to, go over that material again. He didn't want to relive that. So it was difficult. It was difficult, and it was very difficult to get him to open up about it. I mean, he was very gracious and he was very polite, but he obviously didn't want to go over it again. I think it was a painful episode in his life.
How did you get in touch with Bobby? Did you have phone calls with him, or write him via mail, or a variety of ways?
Bobby has a website online, and I had contacted him by writing through the email link on his website. And I believe I heard back from his wife first, and then heard back from him. And it was actually a few months in between our email contact and our actual first phone conversation. We actually talked for the first time on December 21st of last year. And after that, he was on hold because I didn't know whether Jimmy Page was actually going to be able to contribute to the piece. He was very busy with his new solo record and didn't really have the time to talk. So Bobby and I actually spoke in April, I believe, and we had a marathon phone session, which was really great. I mean, he had incredible things to say, and he had very deep insight on the whole history of the film and the history of the 60s in general, and he's pretty knowledgeable about things like Crowley and Horace and the themes in the film as well.
Mm-hmm. Who actually did the interview with Jimmy Page, since he wouldn't let you do it?
Yeah, a journalist in England who works with classic rock named Peter Makowski. And I was sent the raw transcript that he did with Jimmy that I basically went in and cut all the juicy parts out and then put the rest into a sidebar.
Did you give Peter the questions to ask, or did Peter kind of run with it on his side, and then you just kind of take what you could?
I believe Peter had seen my first draft of the article. I had written just a basic historical overview of the article without any of the interview material, and I believe that Peter had seen that and based his questions accordingly. And in addition, I mean, this story came out in the mid-'70s, and there was actually a big piece in Sounds magazine, which was one of the big newspapers in England at the time, concerning this whole back and forth between Jimmy and Kenneth. Kenneth had held a press conference after Jimmy had kicked him out of his house, I believe his house in Boleskine. Jimmy, retorted, he responded to the accusations that Kenneth made. That, Kenneth had said that Jimmy had lost his magical powers and that he was, way too hopped up on heroin to be effective anymore, and that his music was no longer, truly Luciferian in his words.
Jagger ended up doing this soundtrack. Was there any attempt to contact Mick Jagger about this?
Well, the Stones were on tour. The Stones had been on tour for their latest album, and we were unable to get a hold of them. The soundtrack that Mick Jagger did was for an earlier version of the film that was released as Invocation of My Demon Brother. And that footage was the original footage for Kenneth Anger's original incarnation of the film, which took place in, he had a house. It was the old Russian embassy in San Francisco. They called it the Russia House. It was just off of Haight-Ashbury. And they did a number of magical rituals. And they also filmed the Rolling Stones concert in Hyde Park on July 3rd of 1969. July 5th of 1969, which took place just 2 days after Brian Jones drowned in his swimming pool. So Jagger had given Anger the soundtrack based on an early cut of the film, and Jagger was actually working with a Moog synthesizer. And it's a very avant-garde soundtrack. I mean, it sounds like something that somebody like Front 242 or some industrial band would do. It's really it's really an amazing piece. It sounds nothing like the Rolling Stones at all. There's no blues influence in it at all.
But I have a copy of the Page version, and I hear a lot of